I'm not sure anyone is giving the orders at this point, really. I think it is certainly not the three-man interim leadership council that is meant to be running the country right now after the supreme leader was killed. I don't think that council is very powerful. I think there's a lot of infighting between people like Ali Larijani, who you mentioned, who's a very prominent regime figure, Mohammad Ghalibaf, who's the Speaker of Parliament. People like that are vying for power behind the scenes, but no one individual, I think, is strong enough to take control.
130,000 British citizens have registered their presence in the Middle East with the government as the fighting continues. Iran has attacked a US base in Qatar and the American embassy in Saudi Arabia, vowing to open the gates of hell in response to US and Israeli airstrikes. We know, of course, that Donald Trump has criticised Keir Starmer over his stance on the conflict. He told The Sun that the special relationship isn't what it was and suggested the Prime Minister could be pandering to Muslim voters here in the UK. Well, Gregg Carlstrom is the Middle East correspondent for The Economist. And Greg, you are based in Dubai, so tell us what is happening there today?
I'm based in Dubai, but I'm actually in Riyadh at the moment in Saudi Arabia. I mean, it's a similar story in Dubai to what it's been in previous days. There have been ongoing Iranian missile and drone attacks, not just in Dubai, but elsewhere in the United Arab Emirates. There was an attack on Fujairah, for example, which is important because it's a port and an oil loading terminal that is outside of the Persian Gulf. And so it's something that if the Strait of Hormuz is closed, or if it's hard for ships to get through the strait, they can use Fujairah to export oil and to import food and other essentials into the UAE. So obviously, if there were to be damage, significant damage at that port, that would have consequences for both the UAE and for energy prices around the world. So again, we're just seeing this continued campaign of Iranian strikes all across the Gulf.
As we speak, the strait is still open, isn't it? Is there any chance that it could or indeed will be shut over the coming days?
So I think we need to distinguish between the idea of the Iranians militarily closing the strait, imposing a blockade where their ships are, lining the waterway and preventing anyone from going through it. I don't think they have the capacity to do that. Their navy has been struck repeatedly by the Americans over the past few days, and even if they tried to do that, I think they would quickly be pushed back by the Americans. But what's happening now is there is a risk sailing through the Strait of Hormuz. There is a risk that the Iranians will fire missiles at your ship or try to board your ship and seize it. And so because of that, you've had insurers that are canceling policies for vessels that normally go through the strait. You have cargo companies and other firms that are telling their ships not to pass right now and holding them outside of the strait. That's really the issue. It's not whether it can be militarily closed by the Iranians. It's whether Iran can create enough feeling of danger, feeling of risk that companies, for economic reasons, decide not to travel through the strait.
I mean, there's so much we could ask you, Greg, but I wonder if you can tell us who you think is giving the orders in Iran. Is it this man, Ali Larijani?
I'm not sure anyone is giving the orders at this point, really. I think it is certainly not the three-man interim leadership council that is meant to be running the country right now after the supreme leader was killed. I don't think that council is very powerful. I think there's a lot of infighting between people like Ali Larijani, who you mentioned, who's a very prominent regime figure, Mohammad Ghalibaf, who's the Speaker of Parliament. People like that are vying for power behind the scenes, but no one individual, I think, is strong enough to take control. And then I think when it comes to the military and the strikes that we're seeing across the Gulf, I think very often Iranian units are acting in a self-directed way. I think command and control has broken down to some extent. I think what remains of the regime doesn't have direct control over every individual unit in the field. And so when you see Iranian drones crashing into hotels and airports and other civilian targets across the Gulf, I think that is often individual commanders acting at their own initiative because no one is in charge.
And can I ask you, as you are in Riyadh, what is the Saudi view of what's going on? What does MBS want to happen here?
The Saudis are furious, and there's been a real change in the Saudi position over the past few days. I mean, in the run-up to this war, the Saudis did not want the war to happen. They were urging the Trump administration back in January not to embark on this military buildup and not to strike Iran because they were worried about Iranian retaliation. But we've had days now of attacks on the Gulf, an attack on a Saudi oil refinery yesterday. The US embassy in Riyadh was hit by a drone overnight that collapsed the roof of the embassy. And there are officials here in Riyadh who are starting to feel like we have been dragged into this war by the Iranians against our will. We didn't want this war to happen, but we need to pick sides at this point. And there's a lot of talk about either allowing America to use Saudi bases to attack Iran or about the Saudi military getting involved directly. And I wouldn't be surprised if in the next couple of days, we see the Saudis explicitly pick a side in this war and get involved.
I mean, were Saudi troops I mean, are you actually talking about Saudi troops on the ground in Iran? Is that a possibility?
No, I don't think it will be Saudi troops on the ground. And I think certainly if the Americans are not on the ground, the Saudis are not about to do that unilaterally. But I think for the Saudis and for their neighbors in the Gulf, what they might start doing is what they're calling active defense. So not just waiting for Iranian missiles and drones to zoom overhead and then shoot them down, but actually carrying out strikes to try and destroy Iran's missile launchers, to try and strike at the bases from which it launches drones. I think they might do that sort of thing. It's something they can very easily sell to the public at home. People in the Gulf are very, very angry. If you tell them, we need to go carry out strikes to keep you safe, to prevent Iran from shooting missiles and drones at you, I think that would have pretty broad support.
Isn't there a possibility that the Gulf states will get sick and tired of incoming attacks from Iranian drones and beg Donald Trump to call the whole thing off?
That was Iran's hope. That is Iran's hope in carrying out these attacks. That's exactly the logic that eventually the Gulf states will have to bend to the pressure. I think the dilemma for them right now is on the one hand, they do want those attacks to stop. The cost is mounting. People have been killed. Airlines have been forced to suspend operations. Oil and gas companies have been saying there's a multi-billion-dollar economic cost to this already. But on the other hand, if you beg Donald Trump to stop the war and he listens to you and he stops the war, what happens then? You're left with the Iranian regime probably remaining in power across the Gulf. And the regime will learn that, hey, attacks on Gulf countries, that's a very effective tactic to put pressure on the Americans. And so if there is another war at some point in the future, Iran will strike at the Gulf, no doubt, even harder than it has this time around. And so there are some people arguing it's better to absorb the short-term pain now of a weeks-long conflict in order to try and achieve the longer-term goal of not having a hostile regime just a few hundred kilometers across the Persian Gulf.
Just to go back to something that John Pienaar, I know, is going to talk about in more detail with guests and betray us after 4 o'clock. But are you confident that there is a Donald Trump plan for this military operation?
Not in the least, not at all. No. I mean, you listen to everything that he has said over the past few days about his ever-changing objectives. We're going to make a deal. We're going to change the regime and free the Iranian people. We're going to degrade Iran's military capabilities. It's not clear that they see an endgame in this. And I think there are scenarios where Trump can declare victory, right? He can come in, smash the place up in Iran for 4 or 5 weeks, leave behind a fragmented, collapsing state. And then America can go back home and Trump can say, Iran is no longer a problem for us, but it will remain a problem for countries in the region. It will remain a problem for Iranians themselves if that sort of state collapse happens there. So I don't think there's an end game. I don't think they've thought this through. I think the administration believed this might be Venezuela 2.0, where we'll find some pliant regime insider who will work with us and take control and bend to America's demands. But we haven't seen any signs of that person emerging, and I would be very skeptical if that person does emerge in Iran.
So bearing all that in mind, our own Prime Minister's caution about all this doesn't seem such a bad move.
No, it's not. I think the dilemma for the UK and for other European countries in the days to come is going to be, on the one hand, you don't want to get embroiled in America's seemingly aimless war in Iran. On the other hand, this war is becoming a threat to your interests. We see what's happening to oil and gas prices over the past 2 days. We see scenes of tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of Brits and other Europeans who are stuck in the Gulf who can't get out. The UK has economic interests in these countries, so it doesn't want to see a prolonged war in the Gulf that is harmful to its allies in the Gulf, and it's going to come under increasing pressure from the Gulf states to get involved at least in their defense in a bigger way, perhaps even to the point of carrying out strikes inside of Iran to disrupt Iran's ability to fire missiles and drones. There's a desire in the Gulf to see the UK do that, to see France do that, and other allies. And there's going to be pressure to step up involvement.
Really good to have your expertise this afternoon, Greg. Thank you very much. That's Gregg Carlstrom, Middle East correspondent for The Economist. He was talking there from Riyadh in Saudi Arabia.